Right, hello, welcome everybody to this session on the pensions dashboard. My name is Nigel Peaple. I'm a Deputy Director at the PLSA, and I'm very pleased today to have 4 organisations on the stage who have been involved one way or another with the pensions dashboard project over the last 18 months. And of course we have now Nest and Fidelity all up here, all paying members of the core dashboard project. That project that I'm sure you know is coordinated by the ABI, but the PLSA has been pleased to take part in the many of the work streams, including the core project group. PLSA is very supportive of the pensions dashboard. In a world where on average people have 11 jobs in a lifetime, it makes sense for them to be able to see all their pensions in one place. Though we are firmly of the view that it's important that members are seen as at the heart of the dashboard and its purpose. And we also think it's important that at least one of the dashboards is in a trusted space on a public service body, perhaps something like the Single Financial Guidance Body. And for those of you who've seen that we last week proposed setting up a series of national retirement income targets, we're very keen that that might somehow be integrated into the dashboard too, as a way of helping people with their planning decisions. Now, the session we have now is relatively short, 35 minutes, and we have quite a lot to get through. We have 3 speakers. Firstly, there will be from Carolyn Jones, Head of Pensions Product, Fidelity International, will be giving us a kind of background briefing on the nuts and bolts of the dashboard project and where it seems to be going. And she's someone who, like all our speakers, have been deeply involved in hours and hours and days of meetings over the last year. After Carolyn, we will move on to Adrian Boulding, who will give us a bit of an industry perspective. How big a change will the dashboard be for the industry? Adrian is, of course, Director of Policy at Now Pensions, along with a few other things he does. And then finally, we'll be hearing about the member and customer perspective for Mark Rowlands, who's Director of Customer Engagement at Nest. Because it's quite a tight time frame, we'll cover all 3 speakers first, and then we'll do a general set of Q&As at the end. Okay, thank you very much. Over to Carolyn.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk about something we've been involved with for the last 12 months at Fidelity. I think it's fair to say the need for a way to people to connect to their pensions has long been recognised, and with automatic enrolment and the inertia type saving that brings, that's even more of an imperative now as people move through auto-enrolment and lots of different pensions. So back in 2016, which doesn't seem that long ago, but a lot has happened since, the Chancellor announced that industry would launch a dashboard by 2019. He helpfully didn't define what industry was, and if you look around the conference here, industry is wide-ranging. But 16 contributors got together and started work on a dashboard prototype in September last year. And the prototype really had 3 aims. It wasn't to develop an all-singing, all-dancing, consumer-ready dashboard. It was really to work out what the architecture could look like and test that architecture, build a simple prototype based on that architecture, and really learn lessons and raise some questions that the dashboard would have to resolve before being a viable proposition. Scary slide, and I'm not going to go into it in detail, but looking at the architecture, really what it boiled down to was how do people identify themselves safely and securely, and what verification processes out there that will be trusted by the industry and data owners that the dashboard can use. How do we get customer consent to use and view that data through dashboards? Big, important, and probably the biggest piece of the prototype development was how do we find and value pensions? How do we get out to all these people in this room who have got some pension data to share? How do we simply, and more importantly, securely, ensure we pull back the right value for the right people and we don't give people the wrong pensions? And then, last but not least, the dashboard itself. So how do customers review the information? Now, as I said, the prototype wasn't about building a dashboard. It did, because we had to prove the architecture. It would be very boring looking at a prototype with just us going off to pension providers to find some data and not actually showing that data, and you probably wouldn't believe it was happening. So the prototype built a dashboard. We're not saying this is what the dashboard will look like by any means, but we built one so we could talk live to people like Now Pensions and pull their data and use it as a proof of concept. That said, as part of the prototype project, we went out and we did a tech sprint, and we got loads and loads of very clever people in a room looking at what the dashboard could do. And that wasn't just about how the dashboard could look and deliver the messages to members, but what additional services that the dashboard could bring. And that was a really exciting day because it really brought to life. We'd been working in the nuts and bolts of how we can find pensions, how we can match pensions, and hours of discussions on data security and matching principles, and actually getting digital people in a room to say, well, what could this service bring? What could it develop into? Really brought it to life, I think, for everyone in the project. But however successful the prototype was, and I think it's key to note, we actually built 2 prototypes in the timescale, just in case one didn't work. It left a lot of questions unanswered. And we prove out the architecture, we sent data into a dashboard, but really we were left with, well, will customers use it? What will lead customers to using a dashboard? Do we need full coverage? And if so, over what time scale? How and what basis would pension providers and data owners share data? What would stop them sharing data? What would encourage them to share data? What data can be shared, and what's the trade-off between sharing more data but the ability to build dashboard quickly and with full coverage? And what's the simplest service we can deliver that meets customers' goals? The tech sprints show that there's loads we can do with a dashboard, and lots of innovation can happen, but really what do customers want, and what's the simplest proposition we can build to get them there as a starting point? So then the election came about. We delivered the dashboard sort of April, May time, the prototype, and then we had an impromptu election, which some would say was quite fortunate from a project perspective, because it allowed us, the contributors, to initiate a second project, really trying to drill down into those questions and try and form some answers. And we split that into 4 work streams, because what had come out was there's a consumer view, and we really needed to understand from consumers what they would like, and members what they would like. And then there's industry. How are industry going to respond? Are they going to do this voluntarily? Do they need compulsion? Will people come to the fore to develop dashboard? Will fintech want to develop dashboards? Is there a commercial proposition? And then a lot of work had been done on the prototype work on what data we could share, but it left a lot of questions on the realms of the practical in sharing data across what's a very diverse industry, from SIPs with property in, right through to old DB plans that have been around 30, 40 years. Quite an extreme range of industry. And then, to the point I mentioned earlier, what's the minimum service that we could build to meet what those customers want? So, we looked at consumers. So the consumer work stream talked to consumer bodies, so Which, MAS, Citizen Advice, TPAS, and to really drill down into what their thoughts about the dashboard were. But more importantly, we talked to consumers. We held focus groups with consumers. We even asked the people on the focus groups to go out and try and find their pensions. They found it quite difficult. And then we looked at other countries, and we interviewed people who had been integral in developing dashboards in other countries to ask really what their issues were, and more importantly, if they were doing it again, what would they do differently, so we could learn from their experiences. And we really wanted with customers to test 3 areas. Would people use a dashboard? What would stop them? What would make them use the dashboard? What would their reaction be if not all their pensions were shown on day one? How would they feel about that? And would compulsion to make all their pensions shown actually change people's perception of the dashboard? So what do people say? Well, they came back to us and said, it's really hard to find your pensions. Even when you know who your provider is and they're not really lost, it's really hard. It's hard to log on to provider systems when you've not used your password for years and years and years, if ever. So they were really excited about the dashboard. When we talked to them about what dashboard could deliver, they were absolutely excited and absolutely said they would use it and it would change the way they interacted with their pension savings. There was low tolerance for incomplete data, and some said beyond the low tolerance, because they can't plan on incomplete data, was there would be a question for the data that was missing as to why it was missing. If Fidelity didn't show our pensions on the dashboard, what are we trying to hide? Why aren't you showing me? I can see one pension, but I can't see the other. And we could lead to mistrust. So it became very apparent that coverage was important to consumers. And there was a strong desire, and Nigel mentioned earlier, there was a strong desire for a dashboard that was free from commercial pressures, that people wouldn't be sold something through a dashboard, that there was a trusted place to go for a dashboard. That doesn't preclude there being other dashboards with additional services, but absolutely people wanted a dashboard where they felt was trusted and they weren't going to be sold other commercial services. And they did say that would be better with government endorsement. So the other side of the equation, what did industry say? So we talked to trade bodies from a wide range of industries, both from industry that could be a dashboard provider, but more importantly, people who would have to provide the data to the dashboard. We also talked to a range of people involved in pensions and the people who would be responsible for making this happen and sharing their data. So we talked to third-party administrators, insurers, platforms, trustees, public sector schemes, private sector schemes, DB schemes, DC schemes. We tried to get a whole range because ultimately, if we're going to make this work, everyone needs to be on board, and we need to understand what the barriers are and how they differ between the different populations. So what came out of the industry research? And pretty much everybody saw the value in the dashboard from a consumer perspective. There was less agreement about whether there was a commercial driver from a business perspective to build a dashboard, but the great thing was that didn't preclude people from doing the dashboard. They could see from a consumer perspective, even if there wasn't a commercial gain, it was absolutely the right thing to do. Most felt the need for full coverage. There was the questions around how can people plan, how can people use the data if they don't really know that it's everything they've got. There was more differences, less agreement between the timescale that full coverage should be achieved through. Should it be a very, very short timescale, or could we go a bit longer? And there was differing views on that appropriate timescale. Most could foresee additional services being developed on the back of the dashboard, but a lot of people said, let's start basic, let's show people their pensions and then develop the additional services later on. And pretty much across the board, everyone said compulsion is required. The driver for those answers was quite different. So some said they needed compulsion in order to spend the money to provide their data. Some said they wanted compulsion to ensure there was good governance and that the infrastructure would be trusted and secure. And others said, actually, without compulsion, this isn't going to get to the top of our spend agenda. We absolutely believe in it, but there's other competing priorities which without compulsion, it's just not going to happen. So that was sort of the industry and the consumer view, and you can the report is public, so you can go in and read more about the findings. In terms of the minimum service standards and the data standards, a lot of work went on into looking at what the minimum was, but I think the key in both of those work streams was We need a secure way of verifying. So hopefully gov.verify in the private sector, but absolutely there needs to be a trusted way of verifying the data. Getting the data set right is essential. We've got a wide range of data and a wide range of pension schemes and types of pensions, and making sure that we get the minimum data set right that doesn't preclude people providing the data. We don't make it too difficult for people is absolutely imperative from day one. And then the overarching, I think, finding and agreement, which we were surprised about across all work streams, was that compulsion would be required. And really that the findings of the report were that we need the government on board, state pension on board, and the government to work towards making this compulsory and making sure that we deliver a dashboard that is fit for purpose and meets the members' needs.
Okay, thank you very much. And over to Adrian. Thank you, Carolyn.
Sorry, Adrian.
Thank you, Carolyn. My job is to tell you a little bit about an industry perspective on the dashboard, and I've been asked to contrast old world with new world and to show how dashboard fits into the movement on from old world to new world. So we'll get rid of the slides we don't want, and we'll move on to some new slides, which will be fun. I think I was chosen to do Old World and New World. Well, I've just celebrated my 38th birthday in the pensions industry, into my 38th year now. But I work for a New World firm. Now Pensions, where I work, is only just over 5 years old, so we are firmly in the New World section. But Old World, for those of you that remember it, characterised by low levels of consumer engagement. A recent survey on the wake-up packs that are sent out to people approaching retirement has shown that 1 in 3 people can't even remember receiving their wake-up pack. So useful is the communication that is often sent out to people. It was characterised by high exit charges, often driven by commissions that might have been paid to an advisor on the way in. And it was characterised by people that the normal thing when they moved on and left jobs was that they left their pension behind. Nigel mentioned a number which was highlighted in the Making Auto-Enrolment Work Review back in 2010, that on average people have 11 jobs in their career. The distribution of that is actually 1 in 4 of them have 16 or more jobs in their career. So potentially we have an awful lot of very small pots building up. Transferring used to be a tortuous process until Origo came and significantly improved that. It would typically take 45 days to transfer something now, which 90% of transfers happen in under 2 weeks and half of them in under 5 days. You've seen a lot of consolidation, a lot of names have disappeared. They've been replaced by new names like Phoenix that have consolidated a lot of the old small books. Phoenix have now got 6 million people who were sold something originally by somebody else, have now become Phoenix customers. But a recent survey from my own employer, Now Pensions, found that 54% of people in the workplace have no idea what their pot is going to be at retirement or what level of pension that is going to provide them. A same survey showed that 1 in 4 people have got no idea even what they're paying into their pension at the moment. Bizarrely, a third of those are still feeling comfortable that they're going to be okay in retirement. I don't know where they get this feeling of comfort from, but you can begin to see the need for getting some good information out to people. So how are we going to do that in the new world? There are a lot of initiatives coming forward at the moment that are going to drive up levels of consumer engagement. I've got the My Money Pots app on my mobile telephone, the 2017 AE review, which you've got to wait until right at the end of 2017, I gather. One of our trustees sits on the review. It's still making good progress. It'll be along, but in 2 months' time. But that's going to include some exciting stuff about customer engagement and how to drive that up. For people that want to get mobile and to move on, the 2 regulators, FCA and TPR, working together quite well this time, have laid down caps on exit charges. So if you do want to move on, you cannot be charged an exorbitant amount from the person that you are leaving. There is still further work going on in the transfers process, a really exciting group, the Transfers and Re-Registration Industry Group, or TRIG for short. I kind of bet practically nobody in the room has heard of it. That's because it's a good news story. It's a piece of the industry working together. Origo, Tizer, Tex, all the different parties that are involved in transfers have come together and decided if they bash their heads together for the good of the industry, they might actually enable people to see their pensions and move them on somewhere else really, really quickly. So that is all good stuff. Go and look up Trig if you want to know about it, but the newspapers don't cover that sort of thing because it's a good news story, not a bad news story. I mentioned this small pots ONS survey, which came out recently, has revealed they are now growing at the rate of 3.5 million a year. They've now reached 19 million small pension pots dotted around all over the place. So we really do need to do something to sort of try and solve those. And dashboard is one of the ways that she's going to be part of the jigsaw, which will help that. Why is it a problem having all these small pots? It's not just that people might lose them, but actually, in most cases, there is a cross-subsidy going on. Those small pots are not paying their economic way. They're being cross-subsidized by other members in the scheme. If they're needlessly being left behind, then actually that is a drag on everybody else. We're also seeing a great deal of growth of guidance now. Advice has become very much the preserve of the sort of top end. About 6% of the population now have access to financial advice. For the rest of us that can't afford a financial advisor, guidance is the way. There's a new single financial guidance body coming. If you're approaching retirement, you can use the PensionWise service, and I used the PensionWise service last year, and I can certainly encourage anybody approaching retirement to use it. But they do start off by saying, Adrian, go away and add up all the different pensions you've got, and then come back and have your PensionWise interview. So I had to go and do that without the help of a dashboard to show me where they all were. But it's growing. I saw the PensionWise guys last week, and they now think they have achieved 50% penetration of their target marketplace, which they define as people approaching retirement who do not have a financial advisor and who have a non-trivial sized pot. The sort of people, frankly, that need some help. So that's going well and is great news. Let's come specifically onto dashboard, and in particular, what is it that you as schemes could start to do in preparing for the world of pension dashboard? Well, the first thing is to find out when is it going to become compulsory and mandatory for you to link to the pension dashboard. If you were at the super secretive Gleneagles conference last month, then you would have heard some big hints that it's about to come. And I'm not supposed to tell you that because what's said in Gleneagles is not supposed to be said outside. PLSA, fortunately, a much more open organisation. I think we're live streaming to the world from Manchester at the moment, so that's great news. And if you tune in at 5 o'clock to the Pensions Minister's session, then I think we will hear him talk a little bit about dashboard, and who knows, he might reveal the timetable for when we're going to move to a position where for all schemes it becomes compulsory to share your members' data, not your data, your members' data, with the dashboard when your member asks you to do that. That speed of linking that is actually going to be really critical, because if the answer comes back quickly, it engenders trust. And if the answer comes back consistently, because actually, once this tool is nice, people aren't just going to go to it once, they're going to go and check on it again a bit later. And if they check a month later, it should have gone up by 1 month's contribution they paid in, and hopefully a wee bit of investment growth as well. So speed and consistency of response means getting the technology right. What you'll see on the dashboard on typically 11 perhaps entries, and they'll come up at different times. So your member logs on and it goes off to look for their different pensions, and they come back. If your pension comes back faster than the others, then in your member's eyes you look better. Whereas if you're the laggard that comes in right at the end of the list, then you won't be looking so good.
Got about 1 minute, Adrian.
1 minute left.
1 minute
I'll
left.
speed up then.
Yeah.
Great. Consider being a dashboard yourself. There's no reason why your scheme couldn't be a pension dashboard, and if so, offer some helpful tools to members. 2 things that I've found from working with members that they're saying they want from a dashboard: if they have not yet reached retirement age, then they want to know whether they are on target to achieve a comfortable retirement. If they have reached retirement age and they're in some sort of drawdown form, they haven't just annuitised, then they want to know how much can they safely draw out. Those are the sort of tools which you could produce. If you're not a dashboard, then think about click-through, because on the dashboard, on each scheme which comes up, there'll be a link to enable the member to click back through to the scheme. So think about landing page, think about the immediate message you want to give your own members when they click through to you, having seen their thing on the dashboard. Get ready for transfers. When the member sees lots and lots of small pots, they'll start doing transfers. We nearly had an automatic pot follows member project 2 years ago when Steve Webb was pensions minister. The industry killed that, and the industry killed it for one simple reason. It was costing £50 per transfer. That's £50 to pay one out and another £50 for the receiving scheme to get it back in. And the industry said, we don't want to pay all that money, so we want to do it. Dashboard will drive a lot of transfers. They don't need to cost you 50 quid if you get decent systems and processes in order. So think about that. I'll wind up with one simple thing, I think. Other than that, there's a booklet which I wrote on Dashboard if you want to read it a bit. It's on the Dunstan Thomas, one of my other employers, download site. But one simple message, my view of Pension Dashboard is that once we've got it, we'll wonder how on earth we ever managed to live without it. It'll be like the smartphone or the refrigerator or the electric lamp bulb. We'll think, how on earth did people live in a world when you couldn't just go click and see all of your pensions in one place? Thank you very much.
Okay,
I've
Mark.
used all of my time. I'll pass you over to Mark.
Hi, everybody. Customer perspective, that's my job. So, apple pie. That's the answer. It's like apple pie. What's not to like about this? I'm going to talk about 3 things. Hopefully, I'm going to give you some data. I'll share with you some research and hopefully leave you with 3 thoughts. And ironically, for someone with customer engagement in their job title, I think engagement is probably the wrong question to be asking. As part of this process, it's more about what do we actually want the customer, the member, to do. And I think that's a key question we should be thinking about. So, a little bit of... oh dear, that's not meant to happen. Just in the interest of time, we've got 5.5 million members in our scheme, and they're spread like this, which may or may not look like your scheme. We've sort of green sheet of paper a few years ago, so I'll skip over that. Quite interesting slide. This is about multiple pots. So this is our scheme demographic. You'll have your own insight on your own schemes. At this stage, I was going to do a little bit of interactive and get people to stand up and wave at me in terms of how many pots they've got or how many pension schemes. I'll cut that short, but if you've got over more than 5 pension schemes, put your hand up just to give us a sense of that. Okay, that's not that many. More than 3 pots. Okay. So you're probably not dissimilar from the data on this slide, assuming this audience is typically between 45 and 64. What this is showing is whether you've got 1, 2, 3 or multiple pots. We know that customers have got multiple pots. We know that customers think holistically. They don't just think about one pension at a time. They don't just think about pensions. They think about what the money they've saved in whatever form does for them. Where does that actually pay the bills from? Yet, when you talk to annuity providers in the old world, most customers only had 1.5 policies with an annuity provider at any one time. What does that tell us? When they bought annuities, they didn't aggregate. Now, when we look back at that generation of people who currently purchased, it might be a very rational decision. Looking forward, when people have got 11 pots, that will be very different. So, what does this tell us? Customers have multiple pots. We know from research that customers think holistically. This is our member research from a Nest survey, and the first bar in there is basically saying what are the stimulus that will make you think about pension. And there's a few that relate specifically to Dashboard, and you can see that. I don't want to necessarily major on this. The point is customers want this. It will be an active stimulant for them to think about pensions. That has to be a good thing. we do research with our members on a very regular basis, wave after wave of research. This is hot off the press. We ask them that question: what happens to my pot when you retire? When I retire, what's going to happen? 34% of our customers, our members, expect us to convert that into income. 60% don't know what they're going to do. Only 6% actually think they're going to shop around and buy something from somewhere else. So we have to think about that in terms of what that customer expectation is in terms of converting their savings bucket into a stream of income. And I think sometimes we lose sight of this when we think about engagement. A lot of customers just want an easy conversion to income. Dashboard, absolutely. What does it do? It gives ordinary people an easy line of sight on all the things they've been involved in, if it's implemented in a compulsory way and everyone participates. Has to be a good thing. But it's not a magic solution. As Adrian was saying, we have to get the connections in place underneath that. The ability to move money in very quickly and the ability to move money out very quickly and easily for a customer, if that's what they want to do. But when we design that, and when we think about the policy interventions and the role of the trustees in the room in terms of what you're trying to do to help your members get the right outcome, we have to think about those human behavioural considerations as well that we all know from the research. What are your members going to do when they have access to a dashboard? Are they going to make the right decisions, or are they going to make some less good decisions? And this is a really important consideration. So my summary of this would be, and I've tried to sort of skip through a lot of this to be quick on time, but my summary is dashboards absolutely has to be the right answer if it's compulsory. To be effective, we have to integrate them to wider considerations. So as a trustee board, how does that work in terms of a pathway for retirement? And they need to help and enhance and protect members. Now, the protect members is really important. So what I'm going to call out is, I don't know if anybody listened to the You and Yours on Radio 4 a couple of weeks ago, which was a radio programme about freedom and choice, and callers were ringing in. Scammers had mocked up, I think it was the Pensions Wise website. Yeah? Criminals will follow the money. So we, as an industry and as trustees, have to be very alert to the risk of people or criminals coming in and trying to interject here. So security considerations, member detriment considerations. What happens if your members try to move away from a really well-governed, institutional-priced scheme that you run and you put a lot of effort in? Let's say that's charged out at, say, something like 30 basis points, 40 basis points. And your members move out of your scheme to go to a retail solution at, say, 80 basis points or 100 basis points. Is that actually a good outcome? It may be more convenient and the customer may have lumped everything together, but actually, is that what we want? So I think we have to say dashboards, yes, but let's get the balance between convenience and protection. And that's actually something that's really hard and why we mustn't think about pensions dashboard in isolation of all the other considerations from pensions policy and what we're trying to do as a board of trustees with any particular scheme. I'll leave it there and hopefully we can get some debate.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Yes, and absolutely. Well, we'll hold off. Okay, well, all three of them. We sort of have a couple of minutes. We don't really, but let's go for a couple of quick questions, if anyone's got them from the floor. Anybody want to ask a question? People understandably are heading. We've got the gentleman down here on the left-hand side. If we could get a microphone to him. And we've just got one over on the right. And then after that, we'll have to clear out. But if you could say who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
Barry Parr from the AMNT. I just wondered whether, if we look back a few years and we think about how Steve Jobs changed the world, if we had a vision like that, do you think he said, well, we can't do this unless the government makes it compulsory to participate?
Any reactions to that one, quickly?
Yes, I think he did. I mean, he needed sensible regulation on things like airwaves, so that you know, if you're Apple and you bought some airwaves, then other people cannot broadcast over the top of them. And so, yeah, I think you do. And we definitely need the compulsion. There are basically two groups of people that will not play in this game without compulsion. One are closed book operators with high charges that do not want to see their business leach away. And they will absolutely fight tooth and nail against dashboard all the way, even if they're paying lip service to the project. And the other group are typically in the trust-based arena, where they've got one of those uncooperative lawyers that says the easiest thing for your pension scheme is to do nothing. Because if you do anything terribly risky, like letting the customer move their data over there, you might get into trouble. And those uncooperative lawyers and those trustees that are bound by them, again, they turn upside down when suddenly the legislation says you've got to do it.
Okay, and then we had a, if you don't mind, I'm going to, there was a question over here.
Yeah, there's been some criticism from the...
If you could wait, the mic's just coming so that everyone can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks. John Greenwood, Corporate Advisor magazine. There's been some criticism of the decision to not allow delegated access to advisors, because advisors are potentially going to be people that would be able to extend coverage advice a lot more efficiently if they can get access to this, because the time to take advice will be massively contracted by being able to have access to that.
Caroline, do you?
Yeah, sure. There wasn't a decision not to allow delegated access. What the project looked at was what customers want and what would be needed as, using terminology, a minimum viable proposition in order to meet those customers' needs. And for the vast majority of people without advisors, the dashboard was about finding their pensions and having it all in one place. Absolutely, that's not to say there won't be other services, as I talked about when I was up on the stand. And that isn't to say that they won't be there for day one. What we looked at from a project perspective is, what do we need to do as a minimum in terms of data and proposition in order to make this work? The tech sprint absolutely showed us there is other things that can be done and other things that may be done very easily. So the project reported back on its findings and its research, but it absolutely never said, oh, we won't allow delegated access from day one.
Okay, so it's still quite early days really, isn't it? But I think we're all agreed dashboard's a good idea, but it's got to be done right. So we've run out of time. Please join with me in thanking the audience one last time.